Welcome, friends, to another edition of Wolff Responds. I'm going to call this one Chinese Competition, the Myth of Overcapacity. What do I mean? Well, as everyone knows who pays much attention, China is now the great other power in the economic systems of the world. Yes, it has caught up in many ways to the United States. It has done that in record time, and it is now literally neck and neck with the United States, competing on everything from low tech to super high tech and everything in between. And this competition from China, which you can see everywhere in our economy, of course, not in the few places where Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump have erected tariff walls to save us from the competition that the Chinese products would otherwise present. But we know it. We see it. And so it has fallen to the defenders of the United States, which is in many, many cases losing the competition with China, to come up with a reason, to come up with face saving, to try to get people either not to see the competition, not to see how far the Chinese have developed their own economy, or to come up with excuses, ways of understanding what's happening that do not have to admit that China has achieved a competitive, extraordinary development in the last 30 years, far beyond anyone 30 years ago would have imagined possible. One way this kind of negative criticism has played itself out has been the effort of people in the West, which you don't hear so much about anymore, but which is still there, that China, insofar as it's a socialist economy, which is what the Chinese call their economic system, isn't really socialist. They just say that, but they're really capitalist. And why is that the case? Well, if you look at the Chinese economy, there are lots and lots of privately owned and operated capitalist enterprises. And that indeed is quite true. Roughly half of the Chinese economy these days is a private capitalist economy, where the individual capitalists, the shareholders in their big companies, are private individuals, some of whom are Chinese and some of whom are foreigners, including quite a few Americans. All of that is true. The problem is it doesn't explain anything. Many, many, many other poor countries 30 years ago, just as eager as China to develop, and having in their countries larger shares of the economy being capitalist, not socialist, they haven't been able to do as well as the Chinese. Why? Because they're socialist. That's why. Because they have a powerful governmental apparatus. On top of that, a powerful communist political party that makes sure they concentrate their resources on the very development that has made them a competitive powerhouse. So the fact that they allow, which they do, capitalist enterprises to be as big as half their economy doesn't take away from the extraordinary coordination between private and public halves of their economy to achieve what no economy elsewhere in the world, private, public, or any combination, has been able to do. Okay. That excuse having been pushed aside, let's turn to the one that has become more important, more loudly, more frequently encountered. The argument goes like this. It's not that China is better at it than we are. Oh no. It's that China has overcapacity. In other words, it has produced the capability of producing much more than it immediately needs to consume. The supply has been increased by the socialist China far and above its demand, at least the demand at home. And in fact, even bigger than the demand that they can satisfy by exporting out of China. And being capable of producing such an excess, because they have this overcapacity, they are tempted, and they have fallen for the temptation, to unload extra output, what they can get from their overcapacity, at a low price, which is often called dumping in the world. Idea being, if you can't sell at a good price at home, you can always dump stuff abroad at a lower price. That's the argument. That's the charge. Now, here's the answer to that charge, which I think clearly diminishes anything that ought to be credited in its favor. And here I'm just presenting very conventional economics to deal with this question. So let's begin. One of the things economists have noted for hundreds of years is what is called the economies of scale. The larger the quantity of goods you produce, in general, the lower the cost per unit of whatever that is. If you can produce 50 cars in a year, the cost will be quite high. If you can figure out how to produce 500 cars in a year, you can get the cost per unit down. The scale of your production shapes the cost of doing it. All right, if you're a Chinese company and you want to compete in the world against the likes of the United States, you have a built-in advantage which the Chinese have made use of. Their market is much larger now than the United States. They are able to produce a much larger scale of production because their economy, at home at least, has 1.4 billion people in it, whereas the United States, by comparison, has 330 million. Much, much, much less. Of course, the Chinese are aware if they take advantage of the large size of the demand they face at home, and they produce to meet that demand, they will be able to outcompete the United States because that size of production lowers the cost per unit relative to what an American competitor would do. And the Chinese have done that. And why is anyone surprised by this? This has been done by every capitalist competitor inside the United States and outside for the last 200 or 300 years that we've understood what the economies of scale are all about. Number two, it is very common for capitalist enterprises, whether they're privately owned or publicly owned, to try to break into new markets inside their country, around the world, by putting their goods out for sale. What does that mean? Lower the price. Get people to learn about your product so they can maybe, you hope, choose yours over whoever else was doing it by offering a lower price. And the Chinese do that. And the Chinese are smart enough to say, let's build capacity beyond what we need now to get the advantage of a lower cost per unit. That's the economy of scale issue. And then make use of that by offering lower sale prices. We still make a profit because our costs are lower, and we bring purchasing from the public to us because we're offering a sale price. Nothing new, nothing considered inappropriate at all from this kind of behavior. Number 3, China has half its economy owned and operated by the government. And the government in China has always seen itself as trying to take advantage of what private capitalism can achieve, but then have the government come in and do the things private capitalism can't or won't do, but that are needed if the society is going to grow and prosper. That's a crucial part of what the Chinese mean by socialism with Chinese characteristics. So they come in and they do that. And one of the things they do is encourage overcapacity of all kinds of products. And this may surprise Americans, but it shouldn't. What's the logic here? Well, in a capitalist system, we don't expect the capitalists to invest money to produce things in advance of the market. And they usually don't. They wait for there to be a demand, to be a market, before they take the risk, they will explain, of investing money. So what tends to happen is demand rises and then the supply follows. But that's not necessarily the best way to go. Why not? Because it means that for long periods of time, when the demand is there, it takes the capitalists quite a while to recognize how much profit they might earn, to then make the investment, and then to wait months or years before the output flow. During that time, prices go crazy because the demand is high and the supply is not yet available. To give you a simple example, for the United States today, we have record high rentals for apartments. Why? Because the companies that build homes haven't been building them to meet the growing demand. They're waiting for the demand to go up slowly because that drives up the price. Because for them, the higher the price, the more profit they can make when they finally decide it's not too risky to begin building housing again. Meanwhile, for years, millions of people are frozen out of adequate living space. They're paying way too much, which is the condition in the United States. By contrast, China is famous. If you visit there now, they will take you around and they will show you entire villages, entire portions of cities where there are apartment buildings largely or sometimes even totally empty. They build ahead of the demand. They want to make sure that their working class have apartments when they're ready to move, when the demand arrives. They help the demand meet the already created supply. Private individuals, private capitalists won't take those risks, but the government will. It's a way of serving the people. Housing costs in China are therefore much lower than they are in the United States. And there's nothing odd or weird about it. In fact, let me bring this to a close by showing that the very role of the government, and remember, if the government is in production, which it is for half of the Chinese economy, they're not required to make a profit. They're not a private competitive business. That's in the private capitalist sector. There they compete. There are a dozen car companies in China right now competing to make electric vehicles. We don't have that kind of competition in this country. It's long gone, having large numbers of car companies. We had it once, 100 years ago, but not now. All of that has been driven out. The Chinese have competition in the private sector. The government's job is to do what the society needs and wants that the private sector can't get to. You know, we even have a little of that here in the United States. It's not privately profitable to have a mail system that goes into every little village, every corner of this large country. So we have the government do that. We allow the private companies, you know them, UPS, FedEx, the others, to pick off, cherry pick the profitable part, the packages, the delivery overnight, things like that. But the basic core of a postal system, which this country needs to hold us all together, that we give to the government. And that's what the government does. All the Chinese have done is said, that's a really good idea. And they said it when they made their revolution back in 1949. And they said it when the issue arose, what's the most important thing the people of China want? And the answer was an almost unanimous cry, we want to stop being one of the poorest countries on the face of the earth, which they were 75 years ago. Get us out of this situation. We want the income, the jobs, the education, the health care to lead good, normal, productive human lives. If there's a private capitalist way of doing some of that, fine. But that's what we want as the priority. And the government said the only way to get that done is if you limit the private capitalist sector to what they can do best. And we, the government, will do the rest. We'll make sure that the housing gets built, that the railroads get built, that the things that private capitalists either don't do or charge too much for or wait too long to do, we'll make sure that doesn't happen. And here we are, 2026, able to look back at the last 30 to 40 years. And what do we see? The Chinese system has developed that country, the second largest in the world, and not that much less than the number one, which is now India. What we see in China is the most spectacularly successful economic development in the world. Not a minor argument to make that charging them with quote-unquote overcapacity is a pretty lame way to justify the fact that you're losing the competition, that the Chinese have figured out a mixture of public and private, much more successful in achieving the priority goals of that society than anybody else has yet figured out how to do. And instead of learning from what they've done, making sure we all know what is going on there, what we have instead is a lame propaganda war that heaves at them many very inappropriate and silly accusations. And the worst of it is, it's a way to prevent Americans from learning from a society and an experience that has a great deal to teach us. That's why it was important to expose the myth of overcapacity in China. If interventions like these strike you as useful, then please share this video, with your friends, neighbors, family, co-workers. That's why we produce them. And let me appeal as well, for those of you who can afford to throw a little cash our way to help pay the costs of producing and distributing these videos, please consider doing that. Very easy. Just go to our website, democracyatwork.info, and all the ways of doing it will be at your fingertips. Thank you.